Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, Wilder historian Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I animated the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, and in this episode the Army of Tennessee moves across the Chattahoochee River and Johnston gets replaced. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. The military situation in late June 1864 was stressful for the Confederacy as well as the Union. Commander of all Union forces, Ulysses S. Grant, accompanying the Army of the Potomac in Virginia, collided with Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia in some of the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War: the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, North Anna, and Cold Harbor. Combined, Grant lost over 60,000 men in a little over a month of fighting, essentially the same amount of men that Lee had in his entire army when the Overland Campaign began. Grant wasn't able to land a decisive defeat against Lee on any of those battlefields, but had pushed the Old Gray Fox to the outskirts of Richmond. But now the campaign bogged down into a siege of Richmond and Petersburg. In the West, Union General William T. Sherman was pushing Johnston through North Georgia, fighting the battles of Resaca, New Hope Church, Pickett's Mill, Dallas, and Kennesaw Mountain. None of them as bloody as the battlefields in Virginia, but the Confederate Army under Joseph E. Johnston continued to retreat, pulling back ever closer to Atlanta, but the Georgia city had yet to be taken. Although progress was being made on the Union front, it seemed like United States President Abraham Lincoln was running out of time. The elections in November of 1864 could see peace Democrats or war-weary Republicans take over Congress and maybe the presidency. The public was tired of war, especially without seeing the significant progress that would signal an end to the conflict. Many Republicans were turning against Lincoln. The radicals believed that Abraham Lincoln was being too lenient with the Confederacy and that he didn't push hard enough for emancipation. They also believed Lincoln had failed to prosecute the war adequately. Northern peace Democrats were either against the war from the beginning or came to favor peace when war weariness set in. Those political waters threatened to oust Lincoln if something significant didn't take place soon. The Confederate government sent operatives into the North and especially into Canada to operate in promoting peace Democrats and supporting them. They did so from Canada to disassociate themselves from the Confederacy, which would make peace Democrats seem like they were pure traitors if they were indeed dealing with Confederate agents. One of their plans, besides supporting peace Democrats, was to make the price of gold go up. Throughout the war, the price of gold signaled to a lot of people how well the war was going. As long as the prices stayed low, morale was good. Those Confederate operatives, to add to the low morale, could buy gold in the North and ship it overseas to Europe. With less gold in circulation, the price would increase. Unfortunately for the Confederacy, President Jefferson Davis viewed the military campaigns as far more significant and pursued those covert operations with less enthusiasm. As the Union and Confederate armies sat outside of Marietta, Georgia, Joseph E. Johnston, the commander of the Army of Tennessee, received two visitors about a week apart. The first one was his friend and Texas Senator Lewis T. Wigfall. Wigfall didn't agree with how the Confederate president was prosecuting the war, and he came to see Johnston and inform him that the rumors were swirling around Richmond that he was going to be replaced by his corps commander John Bell Hood. The second visitor was Benjamin H. Hill, a senator from Georgia who came to understand the military situation and relay that information to the president. Hill was also concerned about the city of Atlanta and wanted to get reassurance that Johnston was going to hold the city. Johnston assured Hill that he could hold out north of the Chattahoochee River for a month. With that information, Hill set off for Richmond and a meeting with the president. During the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, John M. Schofield's 23rd Corps of the Army of the Ohio slipped a substantial amount of brigades around the left flank of Johnston's army, putting Union troops closer to the Chattahoochee River in Atlanta than any of the Confederate troops in the Army of Tennessee. Johnston, scared to be cut off from Atlanta, pulled his troops away from their entrenchments on Kennesaw Mountain and moved them towards the Chattahoochee River. His engineers threw up an impressive amount of earthworks prior to the army's arrival, and its intricacies made it probably the most formidable fortifications during the campaign. Sherman pursued Johnston south, moving James B. McPherson's Army of the Tennessee to his right flank as they chased after the Gray troops. Sherman viewed Johnston's entrenchments and knew that no frontal assault could dislodge Johnston from his new position. So he began to formulate another plan to make Johnston leave the area and cross the Chattahoochee River. Schofield began moving to the east to find a way across the river to outflank Johnston. Although Confederate troops destroyed bridges along the river, Schofield found part of an old dam that would allow his men to get across. With Federal troops now on the other side of the Chattahoochee River, Johnston declined to dispatch troops to throw them back across, and on the night of July 9th, into the morning of the 10th, Johnston moved across the river, burning the bridges as he went. While Schofield worked away at crossing the river, Sherman planned destruction for the rail lines going into Atlanta. He sent out 2 cavalry raids, only one being successful, that under Lovell Rousseau, which cut the rail line to the west of Atlanta, burning a significant railroad bridge, cutting Georgia off from Alabama and Mississippi. To add on to Rousseau's success, Sherman ordered McPherson to the east to cut other rail lines running into the city. He intended to make Atlanta useless to the Confederacy, and it was working. Johnston was now on another defensive line behind Peachtree Creek, just about 3 miles from Atlanta. Just before the withdrawal across the river, Johnston put in place the permanent replacement to Leonidas Polk, Alexander P. Stewart. Stewart commanded a division in Hood's corps, but now commanded Polk's troops, dropping William W. Loring back down to division command within Stewart's new corps. Loring was upset about getting passed over, but Stewart had proven himself a capable commander. Stewart was born in Rogersville, Tennessee, graduated from West Point Military Academy in the class of 1842, but resigned his commission in 1845 to become a professor. He fought at the battles of Shiloh, Perryville, Stones River, Chickamauga, Missionary Ridge, Resaca, and New Hope Church. His record as a strong leader was proven, and Johnston approved of his promotion. At about the same time Davis was informed of Johnston's movement across the river, Senator Hill delivered the message that Johnston said he could hold out north of the Chattahoochee River for a month. He had lasted just a little over a week. This would be the last straw for Davis, who felt leaving Johnston in command of the army would only result in more ground being given up. To make certain that Johnston wouldn't protect Atlanta, Davis sent his military advisor Braxton Bragg to visit with Johnston, and while his emissary traveled to Georgia, Davis went deep in thought about who to replace Johnston with. Edmund Kirby Smith in the Trans-Mississippi West would be a candidate, but he was an opponent of Bragg, and the logical choice of raising Corps Commander William Hardee to that rank was dashed because he was also anti-Bragg, and had declined to be considered for command of the army in the past. John Bell Hood looked to be the only option. Davis wrote to Robert E. Lee and asked him a question. Johnston has failed. It seems necessary to relieve him at once. Who should succeed him? What think you of Hood for the position? Lee replied, "It is a bad time to release the commander of an army situated as that of Tennessee. We may lose Atlanta and the army too. Hood is a bold fighter. I am doubtful as to other qualities necessary." Later that day, Lee wrote to Davis again, saying, "It would be better to concentrate all the cavalry in Mississippi and Tennessee on Sherman's communications." Bragg's assignment to visit Johnston was only to gain ammunition against Johnston. Bragg arrived at Johnston's headquarters, and they talked for 12 hours, and according to Bragg, Johnston did not ask for advice, nor did Bragg offer any. They discussed the condition of the army, which was much worse than Bragg and Davis believed, and the next day, Johnston brought his corps commanders to headquarters so that Bragg could ask them any questions, or if he needed any clarification about the state of the army or the goings-on in the campaign. Bragg insisted that the visit was unofficial, as he was going to visit Stephen D. Lee in Mississippi, but he would meet with the corps commanders separately. Bragg only met with 2 of Johnston's subordinates, Hood and Joseph Wheeler, both of whom were Bragg's supporters. Hood insisted that Johnston had refused to act offensively against Sherman and that Hood repeatedly asked to attack, but his suggestions were waved off by the army commander. Hood also gave Bragg a letter that attacked Johnston as army commander, discrediting him as a strategist. Bragg would write to Davis, "If any change is made, Lieutenant General Hood would give unlimited satisfaction, and my estimate of him, always high, has been raised by his conduct in this campaign." Davis wanted to give Johnston one more chance to assure him that the Army of Tennessee would defend Atlanta. He telegraphed Johnston, "I wish to hear from you as to present situation, and your plans of operation so specifically as will enable me to anticipate events." Johnston responded, "As the enemy double our number, we must be on the offensive. My plan of operations must therefore depend on the enemy. It is mainly to watch for an opportunity to fight to advantage. We are trying to put Atlanta in condition to be held for a day or two by the Georgia militia, that Army movements may be freer and wider." The message astonished Davis. Was Johnston just going to hold Atlanta for a day or two? Without any solid stance provided by Johnston as to his defense of the city, this message signaled a death knell for Johnston's time as commander of the Army of Tennessee. On July 17th, as Johnston sat at his headquarters 3 miles north of Atlanta, a courier brought him a telegram from Samuel Cooper. It read, "Lieutenant General J.B. Hood has been commissioned to temporary rank of general under the late law of Congress. I am directed by the Secretary of War to inform you that as you have failed to arrest the advance of the enemy to the vicinity of Atlanta, far in the interior of Georgia, and express no confidence of the Army and Department of Tennessee, which you will immediately turn over to General Hood." Out of courtesy, Hood asked Johnston to stay on until the fate of Atlanta had been decided, but Johnston knew he could not disobey a direct order. Meanwhile, Sherman moved his army across the Chattahoochee River to confront the new Confederate commander along Peachtree Creek. The battles for Atlanta were about to begin.